Time for our rising crisis update. We'll begin in the United States and then around the world. So in the United States, we have 366,238 cases, 10,959 deaths. Around the world, 1.3 million cases, approximately 75,781 deaths. Of course, a note of caution on the worldwide cases, given the lack of information coming out of some countries, lack of transparency, lack of testing. That's one of the things. But here in the U.S., these numbers are relatively light and compared to the amount of testing, some ER visits and hospital things that we've seen, but still paints a picture of we're seeing large growth, but there is some hope, I think, in the numbers right now.
Yeah, we've seen, look, it's too early to call it a trend, but it's something hopeful in the hardest hit region of the country, that New York, New Jersey, Connecticut metro region. They have seen the number of deaths flatline and even in some cases decline. Now, that's just a 2-day trend at this point. They're hoping that day 3 will come and show that to be a little bit more of a trend, so that it will actually look like maybe they've reached the apex, maybe we have found that flattening of the curve. Too early to say at this point, but it is a hopeful sign. And remember, we talked about, I thought this was so interesting and so important, the thermometer readings that showed when they instituted the social distancing and the stay-at-home orders, the day that they closed the schools and then the next day they closed the bars and the restaurants, right away they could see the number of what they called atypical fevers declining. Those are fevers that would be outside of the normal range of like cold and flu season. So you can tell that those measures were working, and we may, fingers crossed, be starting to see that in the data. So hopeful sign there. On the other hand, very troubling news coming out of the UK. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson was admitted to the hospital. We found out that he is, in fact, in intensive care and had been taking oxygen. They said he was not on a mechanical ventilator, but had taken oxygen. They do say, though, that he's in stable condition. So that's encouraging, at least. But obviously, anytime you're in an intensive care unit, that's a very dire situation.
Yeah, I mean, a head of state in an intensive care unit is just a terrible situation. And, the hearts are with the British people who are, it's a somber time there. The Queen, as we covered yesterday, doing her first address, or only her 4th address ever to the nation in a time of crisis. And it's largely because of developments like this. The Prime Minister is in the hospital, now he's in an intensive care unit. And we know from similar cases that it takes quite a bit of time for recovery, even after you're out of the ICU.
Right.
It can take days. And so right now, it's a really bad situation. One of the leaders of the world's largest economies, of course, a close ally of the United States. And at the same time, this is something that's just breaking news, that Peter Navarro, he's a White House trade advisor, warned the Trump administration in late January with a memo that's just come to light this is reported by Axios and the New York Times, that the coronavirus crisis could cost the U.S. trillions of dollars and put millions of Americans at risk. And it's important to understand this was actually written in late January, dated January 29th. So this is a whole other kind of political period, right after, in the midst of impeachment and all these other things that are happening. And this is, right around the same time of the travel ban that was instituted on China. So the fact that Navarro, he's always been a forward-thinking person, particularly on the issues of China and on global trade, but warned of that so early just goes against the grain of some of the administration officials, like, say, Larry Kudlow.
Who could have known?
Who was like, who could have known this thing would grow exponentially? It's like, well, actually, a lot of people. Saying it here.
Right. Just like we talked to Ken Klippenstein earlier about the military years ago, said a novel influenza-like virus. They predicted this threat down to the types of equipment that we would face shortages of, and no one really did anything. No one prepared, and so now we're living out, a nightmare scenario, and hopefully, again, the numbers are starting to get under control. But there's no doubt that lives were lost because of a lack of adequate response early on. And apparently there was a first memo in late January. There's a second memo as well on February 23rd is the reporting that warned of, this early memo said basically this is a threat. We don't know. Could go either way. Could turn out to be more like a normal flu. Could be a massive problem. This one in February said, no, it is trending towards this could be a really big problem. So you can see that there were definitely people in the administration who were trying to raise the alarm bells early on and not getting that response.
Right, and just a note on this. Peter Navarro has been slimed by the globalists in the administration like Gary Cohn and like Larry Kudlow and many others who were friendly to Wall Street for almost the entirety of the time he was there. But there was a reason that he was in the White House on the Trump campaign in the first place. He was one of the few academics in the mid-2000s who had has talked about China and global trade and the effect on industrial supply chains and all of that. So he's been forward thinking on this, and it was smeared by the press and by many of the people who are Wall Street friendly in the administration for so long. And as usual on these things, he turned out to be completely right from the very beginning. So I just want to make sure that he gets a note of credit here.
Very interesting stuff. All right, thank you all so much for watching. We'll have another crisis update for you tomorrow.